Good morning, everyone. Thanks. Thank you for having us. I also want to introduce Ryan Denham. He is our content director, so say good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Thanks. So, Ben, about that job. Here's the question, the job that ostensibly I let him go from. Question, just a quick poll, show of hands. Can you be fired from a job if you're not actually paid? Anybody remember that old Seinfeld episode where Kramer, we're going to have to go in a different direction? And he said, but I don't even really work here. To which the reply is, that's what makes this so difficult. No, in all seriousness, thank you, Ben, for inviting. He and I are good friends, and it's nice to see a lot of friends and a lot of friendly faces. Some of you I have not seen in some time. I don't know why. Maybe I've just been lazy for the last couple of years, but it is really good to see you. So, another quick poll. Who here has heard of WGLT? Raise your hands. All right, that's pretty good audience penetration. We'll see you later. So the next one's probably pretty easy. Who here has heard of NPR, National Public Radio? All right, also we're so far so good. We're doing all right. So our objective here today is just to give you a little walkthrough. A lot of you probably know all this, so we'll try not to dwell on some of it, but you may learn something new. And my hope is maybe at the end, there's a little time for some Q&A. Sound good? Shall we proceed? Okay. I promise to have you out of here by 11 o'clock. You know, I do that joke every time, and most of you roll your eyes like, oh, we've heard that one before, but every once in a while there's one or two people. Oh crap, is he serious? No, I'm not. Well, I promise we'll have you out of here on time. All right, so those are the logos. What am I doing? All right, we'll start with some trivia. I need to stay here, don't I?
Yep.
Sorry.
Don't go farther than the flag.
Just tell me. I tend to walk and use my hands. I'm Irish. Forgive me. I will try to stay put, though. All right. Does anyone here know what the call letters WGLT stand for? Right.
Gladly learn and teach.
That is correct. We gladly learn and teach, which is Illinois State University's motto. Nicely done. Round of applause. We have some goodies, by the way. I brought some t-shirts, one in all sizes. So we can get you connected afterwards if you want to come up. We'll have you walk away with a little something. How many people knew that? Well, you didn't raise your hands. You let him do it.
He blurted it out.
He raised his hand.
He's louder.
All right, so that's where, ouch. All right, so that's where we get our name. And the date goes back to the 1960s. Okay, so what is WGLT? Chris, I know you mentioned earlier that you usually have it in front of you, which is also the same thing with me, so I'm going a little bit off memory here. And I'm going to have to take a quick peek just to make sure I don't miss anything. All right, so yes, we are a non-commercial radio station as defined by the Federal Communications Commission. Radio and television stations are governed by the FCC. If you've ever wondered why all the NPR stations, all the religious stations, most of the university stations are all in the 88s, 89s, and 90s, that's why we're classified as a non-commercial radio station. So, other than being at that end of the dial, wow, if I dated myself, how many of you remember a radio dial? Other than being a lower number, what does that actually mean? Well, it means we don't sell commercials in the strictest sense. We do sell underwriting announcements, but there are heavy limitations on those, including the length. We're not allowed to do comparatives or superlatives or calls to action. But we do, and we could not do what we do without corporate and business support. In fact, more than 50%, close to 60% of our budget annually comes from the local community, be it business or individual fundraising. All right? Any questions as we go along? We're good? So far, so good. What else do I have to hit here? All right, so NPR, we talked about. Illinois State does help fundraisers, help support us with the building. A lot of bills that I don't have to worry about, water and electricity. They add up. You all, a lot of business owners here, you know that. But we are to provide a community service. And our community service consists primarily, at least from a local staff standpoint, of local journalists, like Ryan. And you all are Rotarians, and by the definition of a Rotarian, you're also the same word that I consider myself, a communitarian. Community is really, really important. And communities and countries are bound together, sociologists tell us, by shared stories and a shared set of facts. Now, we can have different opinions about those facts and about those stories, but we have to share something, right? And that's where journalists come in. And I'm very proud that we have been able to increase our journalism staff significantly in the last 5 years. Oh, look, there they are. Look at all those friendly faces. You'll also see 2 logos up there. This is our full-time staff. There's also a logo for WCBU, which is Peoria's public radio station. In 2019, the radio station over there had lost a significant amount of money. Bradley University, which owns it, had said enough is enough. We decided to step in because we saw an opportunity to devote more resources to local content, to local news, and save on things like management and the business end. So why pay me when we can pay more Ryans? So we have shared business operations. Everything in the background is shared between the 2 stations, but the new staffs are separate. So that's our happy full-time staff. The other thing we're really proud of is look at all these folks. So these are our correspondents. In many cases, these are people who've trained to be journalists. They're former journalists at other outlets who just want to work part-time. And we're also really excited. Look at those young people. Now, I know everybody in this room feels very strongly about the need to bring the next generation along, right? Despite what we might think, we're not going to live forever. And if we want to leave this place better than we found it, we want to do so by bringing the very best and brightest along. So 5 years ago, WGLT had maybe 1 or 2 students on staff. Now we have that many. So I'm telling you, feel very good about the young people who are coming along. We've got a great crop of students at Illinois State. Ryan actually heads up that program. They want to be involved in their community. I know I get this way. I get off my lawn mode. These kids today, everything else, right? But they want to be involved in their community. They want to tell stories, and they want to make it a better place. So feel good about that. So that's the end of my spiel for now. I'm going to turn it over to Ryan to move us along.
Good. All right, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the types of shows and content you can hear on WGLT. I think what makes WGLT special is this sort of mix of local, national, and international stories that you hear and read on our website. It's very much like an old school newspaper used to be, where you'd have a front page that had this eclectic mix of really deep local, national, and international stuff. So if you're listening for 5 minutes, you could hear 3 different stories from 3 different parts of the world. Our national programs, you can see some of the logos up here, should be probably pretty familiar to many of you in the room. Morning Edition, All Things Considered. We also have a pretty deep mix of music, like World Cafe, which is a national music program we air each night. We try to stay in tune with what our listeners, our hardcore supporters want from our schedule. We survey our audience periodically. I think our last one was last summer, to try to get a taste of what are the programs that are your favorites. Recently, we just added a new show to our daily lineup, 2:30 every weekday afternoon, called Today Explained, it's a half-hour show. It's really interesting because it doesn't try to cover the whole world in a half an hour. It picks one story, maybe 2, and really dives in for a whole half hour. So if you like a deeper dive into a single topic, it's pretty great. Locally is where I spend a lot of my time. This is some examples of the local programming that we offer. Every night at 5, we have a news magazine called Sound Ideas, which is a half-hour program. 3 or 4 stories where we can really take the time to dive deep into something, do a long interview with somebody. The lead off is that second logo you see up there. That is an 8-minute morning news podcast that we do, where if you don't have time to really get into the weeds, you can at least get a quick hit of kind of the most important headlines for that particular day in our local community. You also see we have launched a couple of new shows recently. One of them is on the right side there, Food Trek. It's a podcast and recurring series on air about the local food scene and and the farmers who make that possible. You can also see a number of other logos within logos on the screen here. So this is our local programming is an area where I work very closely with our development team. Our development director, Melissa Liebert, could not be here today, but there's a lot of value in these shows, and we try to find business underwriters, corporate underwriters, to support these shows. And they're what make it possible. These local shows don't work without that kind of support because they're expensive to produce. Also, I'll give a quick shout out to Highway 309 here, which is that third logo you see in the top row. You may not be familiar with our music offerings. I like to think that WGLT's music offerings are sort of the best kept secret within the organization, but it is sneaky good. It's a 24/7 music stream that we have running on our website and smart speakers throughout the week. We put it on the air over the weekends, but if you're sort of sick of listening to your same playlist on Spotify over and over again, if you're looking to just kind of discover some new stuff, Highway 309 is sneaky good. Just briefly, I'll just talk about our kind of philosophy about local journalism, and I know this is a topic I'm sure you guys have a lot of thoughts about too, because local journalism is in a pretty precarious spot in this community, in a lot of communities. We've all seen kind of the decline in the number of reporters who are covering this town, where it used to be if you lived here 10, 20, 30 years ago, and what it looked like then versus now, it's very, very different. Still, I'm a believer and a huge advocate for what local journalism can do. Philosophically, at WGLT, our approach is news of substance. So you're not going to discover or find anything on our air or our website that is frivolous, that is a distraction, that is empty, that is clickbait. If it's there, it's important. And I think that's exemplified by what you see on our website on a daily basis. These are just a couple of screenshots. There's no clutter. We're not cluttering the thing up with goofy listicles, the 9 cutest dogs that you've ever seen in Bloomington Normal, which I would click on that, but we don't have that, sadly. We don't clutter things up. It's just the important stuff. If you see an ad on our website, it's important. There's not a bunch of obnoxious stuff popping up all over the place. It's a pretty good user experience, and I think that's what we want to be known for locally in terms of our journalism. News that matters. I'm going to toss this back to RC for a couple of more points of pride.
Ryan did mention that we did have a third member of our team who was supposed to be here today, but is a little under the weather, as happens these days. So we had to divvy up our table. We had to divvy up the slideshow from memory, and I know it looks flawless. So forgive us as we're a little bit on the fly, but these are some of the things that we are most proud of. Financially stable, it took us a while to get there. We're stable. That doesn't mean that all is great. That's why we're still on the air twice a year begging you for money, right? But we are financially sustainable. Our transparency. This is a big one. It's really dull, but I know that there are probably some other geeks and nerds in the room. If you go to that website, everything about us, pretty much, is available. Part of being associated with Illinois State University, which is, of course, a state-run entity, we couldn't hide things if we wanted to. You all know that, but we like to have it out in the open. So poke around, take a look, find out more about us. Our involvement with students. Again, we talked about the future of journalism and trying to be innovative and nimble and look for opportunities. We talked about the partnership with WCBU. Again, it is working. That station, which had lost several $100,000 in its last years under Bradley, has now broke even under our management for 3 consecutive years. The Vedette has also struggled. If you're familiar with the student newspaper, it is now coming in under us. We're going to partner with more students. Eventually, if a certain EV manufacturer that we're all excited about stops hiring people away from ISU, so we have construction managers to get us moved, we will be moving into the Vedette building and away from our spot on the quad. Don't get me wrong, we're thrilled to have Rivian, but everybody's kind of feeling that, right? So those are some of our points of pride, and again, we certainly invite any questions. Who uses WGLT? And by the way, I prefer to use that term uses instead of listens. Certainly a lot of people listen. People listen still on their radios. People listen on their phones or smart speakers through the stream, or they'll listen on demand with our podcasts. But the larger share of our audience right now does come from our website. So I don't want to necessarily dwell because you can all read for yourselves, but that's an overview of our audience. We certainly invite you to connect with us anytime. You can connect with us. We're happy to hang around after the meeting and talk a little bit. But one thing I want to leave you with, it's not necessarily part of the slide, Ryan can speak to this too, and I know that there are some folks from other media outlets in this room. And one of the things that frustrates me, okay, I'm an old radio guy. I've been in radio since high school. And if you'd have told me, Ryan's an old newspaper guy, you'd have told me 20 years ago that newspapers would be hanging on by a thread in good, economically stable communities like ours. No offense, but I would have been, yes, serves them right. Because I'm competitive, right? I mean, you're all business folks. You're competitive too. But be careful what you wish for. Be careful what you wish for. A lot of what WGLT is doing now is trying to do what newspapers once were capable of doing. And it's not the newspapers or radio or television that's business model failed. And that's something I hear all the time. Well, they just had an outmoded business model. That's not true at all. What happened was, and again, nobody needs to shake their heads, but it was a bubble. You had all these very large companies overextend and go buy and buy and buy and buy. Now all of a sudden they had to figure out how to make their money back, keep the stock price afloat, squeeze staff. What happens when you squeeze the content that you produce? You lose viewers and listeners and readers and subscribers. So then you have to squeeze more staff, and then you're in the death spiral. And that, folks, is where we are right now. But I do believe that WGLT's nonprofit model can be a big part of telling our community story going forward. And that's why we do what we do. So I invite you to connect with us. I know we ran a little short on presentation time, but we are happy to answer or ask questions if any of you have them. So we do appreciate your time. Any questions at all? Heather?
So you're moving.
Mm-hmm. Well, someday.
Someday. What is that square footage compared to where you are right now?
It's a little, how many in this room, I believe you've been up to WGLT? How many of you have been to the WGLT Studios in Old Union? It's an architectural nightmare. I don't know who that architect, I almost used another word, but there are kids in the room, so I don't want to. I don't know who designed our studio spaces in the 1970s, but it's all separated and there are little nooks and crannies all over the place. And I also thought it would be a good idea to cover up every window. It's the 70s, man. So it's actually about the same square footage, but it's much better utilized. And it'll be the same square footage with more students, but again, we'll still come out ahead.
And where will that be?
So that's I'm sorry,
Where will that be?
okay, I didn't know, I couldn't tell who asked. The Vedette building is currently on Locust Street. So it's kind of catty corner northwest of the Bone Student Center parking lot. Yes,
I connect to WGLT the old-fashioned way on my car radio.
beautiful.
And sometimes I'm driving around town listening, and all of a sudden it just goes dead. Is it my car, or does I
Yes.
picture the transmitter going up and down? Maybe it's my car, but all of a sudden, gone.
I hate to tell you it's all my fault. No, I mean, without knowing specifically, it's probably, I'm gonna guess, power lines.
Well, I
Or,
understand that, no, but it's not like you're turning the transmitter power up and down.
right,
Okay.
right, no, it's it's not really you or us.
You can tell when Bob turns his radio on.
Just drains the whole thing and we hear it outside, yes.
So you always are looking for new stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't it be a really good story perhaps this week to highlight an organization founded by somebody that was in the Peace Corps for a couple of years and got 41,000 donated to Ukraine?
So, now that you mention that, I mean, thank you for bringing that up. We do encourage you really to connect. I mean, you talk about news stories and ideas, and Ryan, you can maybe speak to this. We can't be everywhere. And we do depend on folks to let us know what's going on in the community. So please, no one ever be shy about reaching out to us and let us know. Now, I'm the general manager. And again, for the other media types in the room, I am a big believer in keeping a firewall between the business and management side and the journalism side. And I think I do a pretty good job of that. So any story that comes to me, and I've had people, hey, you should do the story. I just kick it over to them and they decide. But do you want to talk a little bit more about it?
Yeah, to your specific question, actually, we interviewed Kara on last Friday morning. And we aired that interview that evening on Sound Ideas, which is the news magazine. Put it in our newscast that afternoon, and then I can tell you're listening. And then on Saturday, now we know the number. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. 41 is not to sneeze at.
No one expects you to be listening 24/7. 18 hours a day is plenty. Any other questions? Yeah.
So I know you guys were second to get Twitter on your bid, and I'm sorry that you missed that. But what's your?
There was a gap.
I knew that would happen, but I'm just curious what you guys in the media, what's your take on it?
I have so many feelings.
Yes.
Yeah. I have so many feelings on this subject. I'm personally probably going to step away from Twitter if the transaction closes out of like a personal objection to Musk. I think Musk, I don't know why I'm sharing personal. He treats the media really poorly. Tesla has a kind of they literally don't have a media relations department. And so when media organizations like us try to contact Tesla for, I don't know, do your cars, does the auto steering work? How's production going? Things like that. They don't respond or talk to the media at all, which is a person who works in the media I really dislike. I also have some qualms with his approach to kind of free speech issues. As an organization, though, WGLT needs to be in these spaces. So I anticipate we'll continue to be on Twitter. We've talked very seriously about whether to stay on Facebook. I mean, a year ago, I think we had some discussions about, got some serious kind of ethical concerns with the way Facebook has kind of broken the world. We thought about stepping away from Facebook, and that could still happen if something crazy occurs that pushes us that direction. But yeah, I have a lot of feelings about Twitter and Elon Musk.
Most of my feelings are directed actually towards Facebook. And I was part of those conversations, and in the end, we decided it was probably better for us to remain there. But what interests me about social media, that people will ask, where's this thing gonna be in 5 years, 10 years? No one knows. Elon Musk doesn't know. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't know. They know where they might want it to be, but they really don't know where it's gonna go. And the lack of awareness about how social media actually works is pretty frustrating to me. I do also teach a class at ISU every semester, and inevitably we'll be talking about something on social media. And of course, most of the younger folks view Facebook as something their grandparents do. You probably know that, right? But even they don't know how it works. It's, I try to explain to them, it's not just a linear news feed. What do you mean? Well, they're serving to you, the algorithms are serving to you what they think is most likely to elicit an emotional reaction, saying a lot of nods. A lot of you know that, but a lot of people don't. And that's really frustrating. And that's something, again, that we try to shy away from. We don't, Ryan doesn't, we keep track of our big picture numbers, just to make sure we're reaching an audience, but we don't look at, okay, this kind of story doesn't generate clicks, so we're not doing it anymore. Because I think that sort of thing can be dangerous. So I could actually go on and on about social media in general. Facebook was the other thing that broke local newspapers that nobody really wants to talk about, but it was Facebook that did it. So, and I'm not sure that was a good thing, but great question, thank you.
Yeah.
You're talking about your demographics. Have you seen any major shifts or anything to that degree in your time at WGLT?
The audience has grown larger, which is a good thing. Now, I do think that is in part because other media entities no longer have the resources dedicated to covering local news, and people have found us. That's the flip side of social media, right? Is the fact it can be extremely powerful, and it can give the little person much more opportunity for reach. So it's not all bad. So we've seen a larger audience. I do know that NPR nationally, at times, I showed you, the happy numbers, right? About who uses WGLT, who uses NPR. We are struggling like everybody to figure out how to reach younger folks and to keep them engaged. I'm not sure TikTok works for us. I'm not sure TikTok works for in-depth storytelling. Sorry, it's okay. You can applaud, there's nothing wrong with that. So that's a struggle. The NPR audience is not terribly diverse. And the fact that it reaches folks who are higher income and higher educated, okay, that's great, but our mission is to try to serve the entire public as best we can. And that has been a struggle. So, and I think will continue to be. I don't know how you guys do these early meetings all the time. I can barely speak, and that's what I do for a living. So I'm gonna guess that these meetings are a little easier to attend this time of year than, I don't know, January. But still, good for the Sunrise Group. Yeah.
So what's the challenge with taking over Peoria? I mean, obviously, if they weren't doing well, making money-ish, or at least staying afloat over there, absorbing, the employees that are over there to here. So
I used to have a really great joke about Bradley University that I can't tell anymore because now it might get back to them. The challenge was, to be perfectly honest, it was mismanaged. And, you have, higher ed is dealing with its own challenges, particularly private institutions like that. So they're running this great big engine over there, and they've got this public radio station that's underperforming, and why in the world can't they just do what they're supposed to do? And it was just kind of drifting. So that was the big problem. But it was also, and they caught a lot of flack for it, I could see where they were coming from. That's why they considered just shutting it down. So in many cases, it was just coming in with a business plan and a strategy, and this is who we want on the team. We actually hired a whole new set of employees, which was controversial, but frankly kind of needed, and got a good team there. So that was probably the biggest challenge, was just getting some other folks out of the way, getting some folks who wanted to be there. The other one, though, is the communities are different. And that's not bad. Back when I used to work in commercial media, I would have these consultants and they would fly in. We had this guy come in, his name was Brian Jennings. And he would come in, he had his little man purse, and he would just talk at people for 2 days and then leave and write up a report that he'd send to my boss. And the report, and he would always talk, well, this thing's worked really well in Boise. Oh my God, this thing in Portland, Maine was just a huge, huge success. Well, okay, maybe there are some things that work everywhere, but Portland, Maine, and Boise, Idaho are not Bloomington, Normal, Illinois. And Peoria is a distinct community. Not good, bad, or indifferent. So being aware of that and understanding that the folks who live there every day and work there every day know more about their community than I do or Ryan does is something I think we have to remind ourselves of. Great question, thank you. Yes.
I was just gonna say that I appreciate the lead off podcast. I mean, it's just a few minutes to kind of get a quick glimpse of what the hell happened, and then I can go and find more detail later if I want to, but I just really appreciate the existence of that, like 8 minutes, and I've got a sampling of what I need to be paying attention to, or if I can just move on, excuse me. So thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you. And that started, by the way, as kind of an experiment. A podcast that we could use on the air. You can hear it on the air at 5:44 and 7:44 in the morning, and it is designed just to be kind of a bite-sized. You all realize that Bloomington Normal has one of the shortest commutes in the world, or in the United States. It really does. So, it's not like we're in Chicago and we've got you locked in your car for 45 minutes every day. So it was an experiment, and it's caught on. Thanks, Jamie. Yeah.
Yeah, I could speak to the fact that Peoria and Bloomington are different. In fact, Bloomington and Champaign-Urbana are different. As an overall community, if you go from Galesburg to Champaign-Urbana, it's a lot of people that could do a lot of stuff if they unionize together the radio stations and their power, but they won't because they're still individualistic communities. And growing up in Peoria and spending all my business life over here, I know the difference between the two. And it's not something you can explain in everyday talk. My former partner was always like, Bloomington should be getting as much sales as Peoria does. And I'm like, every number on every statistic, Peoria is twice as large as Bloomington. They have twice as many of everything. If you want to talk about people working and resources and so on and so forth. I mean, Peoria has one of the most dynamic hospital systems in the country, let alone the state. So it is a different, that's a very blue collar mentality in Peoria, even though half their workers are white collar, it's still Caterpillar blue collar based. And in Bloomington Normal, it's very business, white collar minded people. So you have to understand that difference.
And thank you for underscoring that. We may have some questions to ask you after this meeting to find out more. And I actually agree with your point too about Champaign-Urbana, and you can throw Decatur and Springfield in there, and LaSalle, Peru, and all of this population we have in what, an hour and a half drive end to end and north to south. And I do wish we could work together a little better than we do. And I would hope and think that there's a balance between cooperation, but also keeping your individual community identity. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
I enjoy listening to on my Alexa in the morning. I say good morning. It plays little WGLT clips, so I get to hear the local news. It works most of the time, Ryan.
Yes.
Most of the time.
That's all I could ask for.
I appreciate, getting that update on the news really quick. I feel like it's the facts. What's your philosophy as far as like bias? Obviously, all media has bias, and I enjoy getting the facts. What's your philosophy and how do you handle bias at your station?
Well, I think, and I came up as a journalist, and one of the lessons that was, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ryan after I say this. One of the lessons that was beaten into me, metaphorically beaten into me, was that no human being can be objective. We are human beings. We occupy the space between our ears, right? We only know our own experiences. No human being can be objective, but what you can be and what you can always strive to be is fair. And those are not necessarily synonymous terms. So I think that's really important to keep in mind, and I think that that's something we strive to do.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. My philosophy on this is we are imperfect as journalists, we're as human as everybody else. So, my answer here is kind of coded in that imperfection. What I try to do in my head as we're making decisions about this stuff is I set the extremes off to the side. There are those on the far right and the far left that are not going to appreciate our coverage and are going to consider us biased on all matters. We are aiming for the great big middle, of which I think a lot of you in this room are part of. Those people who are serious about the community and are not going to allow themselves to kind of fall off into those fantasy lands of the extremes. And when those people in the great big middle say that we're biased, then I start to listen. And I can, years in this business, I can tell those people apart generally. I think my colleagues can too. But that's who we're going for. And I think we serve those people. And when they say we're biased in something, that's when my ears perk up and I start to, okay, maybe we got to think about a different interview to find a new way to approach this story, that kind of thing.
Ryan is being very, very modest too, because he's implemented a lot of changes that I think have been for the better, including the transparency, including source tracking. That's actually auditing on a regular basis who it is we're talking to make sure that we're not talking to the same folks all the time, and to make sure that the people we are speaking to are hopefully somewhat reflective of the community at large. And the other thing is, when we make a mistake, we try to own up to it. And try to own up to it in the same sphere in which the mistake was made, which is something that I don't think every media outlet does. So, good question. You guys have all been great. Thank you. We have time for one more. you guys want to ask questions? We
Yes.
got one more.
We'll take one more.
Try to take care of you.
I'm kind of with Jamie and Cheryl too. I listen in tidbits and, today driving from North Normal, hit every green light driving here, so the commute was short. But just the interesting stories, I learned about rats. The New York City rats, then the rats of the world, and I feel smarter. I'm not being sarcastic. I'm like, would I ever pick up a book and read about rats, or probably not watch a story about rats, but in, that 8 minutes that I blasted every green light, I learned about something that I did not have learned about.
Thank you. And I think that that's one of the dangers is there's a tendency now to not necessarily want to expose ourselves to new ideas of any kind. Even the random story about rats where you might learn something and be a little bit smarter. And to also, kind of cluster into this, I only want to be around people who agree with me all the time. And I don't know that that's fun. And I also don't know that it's tenable, because I don't think there's anybody exactly who's going to agree with me on everything anywhere in the world. It just can't happen. We can't get our way all the time. So you all have been great. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Good luck and have a great day.